Okay, we're starting a new Torah portion and a new book of the Torah, which is Devarim. And it's an interesting word because it means so many things. Of course, Devarim, we tend to think of it as words. However, when we look at that root letter system, the Shoresh, Devar has some interesting play on aspects that I don't know if we'll get into it tonight, but definitely by tomorrow. But it can also mean a bee, Devarah. It can also be the root word of the wilderness, Midbar. And you say, well, how can one root extend to so many different places in terms of words? Because they don't seem to bind together, but maybe they do. Maybe they do, because one pattern that we've seen is that he takes you into the wilderness. There seems to be this necessary step that once he takes you out of Egypt, he doesn't take you directly into the land. He takes you along a route that could be short or it could be long. It depends on you at that point. Getting you out of Egypt depends on him. How fast you get into the land, at least in the Torah, depended on the people. And so he takes you into the Midbar for a specific purpose. He needs to test the word in you. And he says that very specifically. You know, I wanted to test you to see what was in your heart, whether you would obey my commandments or not. And so that intermediate place called the Midbar, or the wilderness, that's your place of testing. That's where he's going to test that word that he's planted. The Devar is tested in the Midbar. And if there's problems in that word testing, then there's another little critter that might come after you, and that little critter is the Devorah, which is a bee. You might remember a judge named Devorah. We call her Deborah, but her Hebrew name is Devorah, which means a bee. We also know that the Torah is said to be sweet, like honey, which there's different types of honey in the Bible. You can have bee honey, but you can also have date honey. They would make honey out of figs as well. You can make honey out of just about anything sweet. At any rate, there might be a way of binding that root as it extends to all these different places and say, well, you know, in their context, it does all make sense. However, as we look at Devarim, what we realize is we have a product that's called the Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah. In other words, as you're reading the book of Devarim, what you realize is you're getting a recap of the previous 4 books. In fact, you might call it the little scroll. You've heard that term before. And in that sense, that's what Devarim is. It's a little scroll. It's a little retelling of the Torah itself. Now, in Devarim, you might get the same story, and we're going to look at that tonight. Why is Moses telling the story of the spies again? As if we haven't already immersed ourselves enough in the story of the spies, Moses feels compelled right off the bat in the first Torah portion of Devarim to remind the Israelites again of how bad a failure it was. And since we're right here, right on the doorway to the 9th of Av, it's a good thing. We can see that when the rabbis set up these readings, they didn't set them up randomly. They set them up so that the 9th of Av would kind of be the middle of a sandwich between Devarim and Va'etchanan. But you know that coming out of Bamidbar now, you've already got a really good context for some of these major problems that were encountered in the Midbar. You know, we talked about how Moses seems like an entirely different person. If you compare him between Exodus, Shemot, and Bamidbar, it's like, who is this Moses? And I think we can agree by the time we get to Bamidbar, he's ready to throw up his hands and he's like, what do you want me to do with them? Just kill me now. They're not going to change. And apparently Moses wasn't going to change either. And so he gets left behind, which sounds like a movie, but or a novel series. At any rate, this little Mishneh Torah, the retelling of the Torah, what we know already is that when he repeats something, it's for a reason. He doesn't just rattle on like we do. When we rattle on, we're just rattling on, right? We like the sound of our own voice. However, when Moses rattles on, it's not because he loves the sound of his own voice. Apparently he doesn't. He's a very humble man. And so he doesn't just repeat himself because he's getting senile, or he thinks they didn't hear him the first time. He's repeating things not just for them, but he's repeating them for us. So if at this point, having just left Bamidbar, we're coming into Devarim, and he says, okay, I want to tell you the story again. I'm going to tell you the story of what happened when we could have gone straight into the land without opposition. And we ended up 39 more years in the wilderness. That's worth telling. If you've just left a generation in the wilderness, it's probably worth telling again. And I know it's kind of like the family stories. When you get together at the holidays, you retell the family stories, and over the course of the years, they probably change a little bit. We tend to embellish them a little bit or dramatize them a little bit, and they just get better and better every year. In this case, I'm not sure the story gets better. But what it does when you're reading in Devarim, if you will compare what he's reminding you of in Devarim and its previous context, for instance, the story of the 10 spies, you'll realize that he will introduce some new information. And it's not that you disregard the first narrative, it's that you take both of them. Because remember, the perspective is going to be a little bit different in Devarim, because they're looking backward instead of being immersed into the problem as it's happening. And that happens to us too. Our perception of something that's happening to us right now will be a little bit different when we're telling the story 40 years later. And I think that's why our stories do get embellished a little bit every year when we retell them. At any rate, there's something to be learned in the retelling, and we've already looked at it a little bit in terms of why does Moses stop calling them tourists, in essence, where he was using that word latour, which means to explore, to walk around, to meander around, to tour. In fact, the modern English word tour is pretty much the same thing. And so after the experience, now we get over into Devarim and he starts calling them spies. In hindsight, he has a much better grasp on the difference between their two ideas about what their role was supposed to be when they went into the land. So we don't want to leave that behind. We just want to pick up and start there if we can. But first, let me share the screen. We're just going to review the season that we're in, because I know we've had a lot of new people come online with us over the past several weeks. And I know we also have a range of background knowledge. We have people who are teachers themselves, pastors, rabbis, and then we have people who are just learning about a new calendar that's in the Bible. So I'm going to try to hit in the middle there somewhere. And if you do have questions, like I say, if you're new, while I'm teaching and the PowerPoints are up, I can't see you or hear you unless you, for some reason, come unmuted. So if you have a question, type it in the chat box, and then either somebody who's been in the class a while will see it and address it for me while I can't see, or if I need to, after I stop the recording, I'll go back and look at what you put in the chat box and see if there was anything that wasn't addressed by someone else. Hey, Nicole. Good to see you. So let's share the screen here. Okay. And this is just a reminder. Of course, here's your Torah portion. Devarim, it means words or things. Deuteronomy 1:1 through 3:22. Isaiah 1:1 through 27. Psalm 137. And then 2 Corinthians 10:1 through 7. And that could change before tomorrow. I was waffling a little bit on that one. I wasn't sure how far down that road I wanted to go, but it seemed to be a really good example of what we're talking about. But just as a GPS, because we're trying to help you stay on track this year with the fasts as much as the feasts, because it seems as though this year it is the fasts that have manifested themselves in a very recognizable way. So we want, if we don't already have that in our toolkit, in terms of prophecy and so forth, we want to start acquiring that and start to get comfortable with looking at these fast dates and get a background on them. Because like we see in Daniel's prophecy, like we see in Zechariah's prophecy, they are coming up still. They are still cycling through. So it wasn't that they were only important once in history or twice in history. They will continue to be important in history until they are turned into days of rejoicing instead of days of fasting. So this week, we're now going into a change. We're going to change from the month of Tammuz to the month of Av, from the 4th month to the 5th month. You know, we had the fast on the 17th of the 4th month. And now we've entered into what's called the Straits, the 3 weeks. And so this week, we're going to come in on Wednesday to the 1st of Av. You've heard us talking about the 9th of Av and how many, calamities happened on the 9th of Av. And so if we've been in the Straits, if we've been in a tough place, then starting on Wednesday or the 1st of Av, then we might see things get even tougher. It's the tunnel's getting narrower in terms of prophecy. So we'll be going into the 5th month, and that's going to be the beginning of the 9 days that conclude the 3 weeks that take you into the 9th of Av. And just as a reminder, because we are talking about the spies, on the 9th of Av, that is a fast day. It is a calamitous time. What we want to be careful of is don't drop your sobriety too soon, because we know that even though we have this evil decree that we see keeps them out of the land on the 9th of Av because of the evil report of the spies, remember, they followed that calamity up with a new one. And they said, after they said they would not go up, then they turn right back around and they say, we're going to go up. We're going to go make war. And of course, we know they didn't do well in that battle. And so don't drop your guard just because we make it to the 9th of Av and nothing horrible has happened in the world. Hold on to those lessons, guard your heart, and be careful what kind of battles you choose. Or I might say, choose your battles wisely. That might be the better way to word things. Even after the 9th of Av. Remember, you're in the season. And that's why you'll see sometimes in scripture, the way things are worded as days, yamim, but it can also mean a general time period. So sometimes it's not specific, it's you're in the time period, so just keep your eyes open and stay alert to what's going on around you. And like I said, choose your battles. Make sure it's worth fighting. And so here's the graphic we had from last week, which is this month's calendar. And you can see that right now, we're still in the month of Tammuz. We're still in the 4th month, and it's the 20th, which would be the 28th of Tammuz. And then if we count forward to Wednesday, that will bring us to Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, if you're not familiar with that, that means the new moon, the new month. And that's going to take us into the first of the 5th month. That's why I say we're going to start that last 9 days that take us into Tisha B'Av, which if you drop down to the 9th of Av, you can see that this year it will fall on July the 30th. So these 9 days, as we go into Wednesday, that's when we, even though we're already, I think, on high alert this year, it's time to go on even higher alert. Remember, at this time, the explorers from the 12 tribes, they would be walking around Israel right now, thinking about what they're going to say when they arrive back at the camp. So we should be doing the same thing. As we go about our business on these days, we should be going in our minds through, what will my report be? What kind of news will I bring back? What will I see during these 40 days that I'm exploring, that I'm on this tour of falling in love with the land? Have I seen in this 40 days what Moses saw on the mountain? And if I haven't literally seen it with my own eyes, have I believed on it in faith? Do I believe that he is able to help me cross over? Do I believe on his word? Do I believe that he will perform his word? If he tells me the hornets will go ahead of me, do I believe him? Or do I just believe in my own strength and I think that somehow I'm going to have to fight this battle all by myself? And in those cases where we feel like we have to fight all by myself, I think that's where we become confused and afraid, and you know, it doesn't take us to a good place. But if we can relax and say, okay, I know what my business is during this 40 days. And then as we came into the fast of Tammuz on the 17th, we say, okay, from here on out, I know what my job is. We had prayer points for the fast of the 4th month. And so we've come on through. Now we're about to arrive at the 1st of Av, which is going to be the 1st of the month of Tisha B'Av. And the way this is understood, and I think Keisha said this when we did the live stream together a couple of weeks ago, and if she didn't, she said it when we weren't live streaming. I know she said it on that day because we were talking about it. How that it seems like on the first day of the month, not the Gregorian month, but it seems as though on the first day of the biblical month, which is called Rosh Chodesh, that there will be events on that particular day that set the stage for what's going to happen during the entire month. In other words, a pattern will be set down on that day, and we can look back at that day and say, yeah, there's some things that happened on that day, and it really did set the tone for the rest of the days in that month, because it's the Rosh, it's the head of the month. The head is where thought starts. The head is where you start planning. And then, you know, the rest of the body can execute the plan, but the plan starts in the head. It starts in your brain. And so in terms of the month, it's kind of similar. You're going to start out at the head of the month, and the thoughts that are going to be enacted in that month, you might see the beginning of that each month. And so for the month coming up, your next opportunity to do that and look and see, well, is that true in my life? Or, you know, is that something I want to watch for? Then look on Wednesday. See what happens on Wednesday. Maybe take you a little journal and keep it for a year. I mean, you're doing your note cards for your Torah portion so that you've got a good summary after a year passes. You have a nice little bullet point summary of what's in each Torah portion. And you can do the same thing with the beginning of the month, because it's something that is celebrated in Scripture. You blow the trumpets on the new moon. So it's not unimportant. It fits into the overall picture of what is important in terms of marking time. And so if you want to add something to your journaling, if you're already doing your Torah portion bullet points, then I would say just, jot down notes at the end of the day on Wednesday. Look back over the day, whether it's the news, whether it's Israeli news, whether it's things that are happening in your family, whether it's something that stands out to you from the Torah portion. It could come from anywhere. I think you're probably going to be the only one that's going to know exactly what to put on that paper or to type in your chart, whatever you're doing. But then check it during that month and just keep going back to your little list from that particular day and see, is this consistent with what I saw on Rosh Chodesh? And it may not pan out for you, but it's always fun to try, because we know that these Torah portions seem to be setting the stage for everything that's happening in our lives, at least in the things that affect all of us. And so I think this is something you can try, and I don't know, we'll see what happens. You can let me know. At any rate, on Wednesday, that's the first of the 9 days. And so in those 9 days, you're going to be looking toward the 30th of July or the 9th of Av. And at that time, remember, you're entering into an even tougher period than just the 9 weeks. That last 9 days is an even tougher period. And you say, well, why is it tougher? Well, remember, on the 17th of Tammuz, that's when the Babylonian army breached the walls. What happens between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av is pretty much you have street to street and house to house fighting. It's a tough time, and the enemy is advancing closer and closer and closer and closer to the temple. And so if you think of it that way, that's how you understand like the pressure of things getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. But you don't have to think of it at this point as retreating, as though you're trying to retreat back to the Temple Mount, because that time in history has passed. And now we have a promise by Zechariah, and we don't know exactly when it's going to be fulfilled, but some year he tells us this will be fulfilled. And this could be the year. Any year could be the year, but this could be the year where instead of retreating to the temple, there's going to be a restoration. So as you're going into these hard times, on this other track, there needs to be another train running that says we might be running on this track toward restoration and a time of Messiah. And there's all sorts of messianic expectancy around this particular time period, by the way. And I don't know that I want to get into it, because we could go down a long road if we do that. But I think it would suffice if we just say in general, as we're looking at this particular time period, there is a lot of messianic expectation surrounding this time period. A belief that Messiah is going to come and begin to restore some things. So that's the other side of this particular season. Now, for those of you who are new to the calendar, and I don't know how many that is, I know we've got lots of new people to getting the recording, so you can't see what I'm looking at until you actually watch the recording. But I pulled up 2 Becky books, and I'm just gonna unashamedly plug these 2 books. If you're a beginner, because short of just having someone there to work through that calendar with you, and show you how the Gregorian works with the Hebrew calendar, and going over some of these issues I've brought up with the Babylonian names, the next best thing is to have a book. And so I'm going to recommend two of them. Keisha's book, The Biblical New Moon, A Guide for Celebrating, because I'm going to bring out something that she put in her book as a reference that I think is awesome, because it's going to tie together Devarim for us and what's going on with these spies and the tzitzit. You'll see when we get there, but it's going to be pretty awesome, I think. But understanding which tribe is associated with which particular month, she'll give you that in her book. And then she will give you some other things that maybe up until this year, you didn't pay that much attention to it, but she will also give an attribute that is associated with that tribe. And in this case, the two that we're going to look at, Reuben, and Simeon, they were both named for a particular attribute. Reuben, Leah said, see a son. And then Shimon, she's like, okay, God has heard me. He's heard my affliction. And so one tribe is going to be associated with hearing, and then one with seeing. And then we're going to see how that fits really neatly into these Torah portions. But that sort of information, if you're new, it's worth the $6 or whatever it is there, $7.99. It's worth that, or you can download it onto your Kindle. But I think to me, it's better to have the paperback, just because it's easier to reference when you're looking at a chart. Sometimes charts don't come up great on a Kindle. The other one, Rabbi Krieger did, and this is Growing in Holiness, the Hebrew Calendar Day by Day. Either of those two books will help you if you're just now learning the calendar, you're just now learning the feasts, and you're just now learning the fasts. And that's the way they're designed. They're designed to be beginner books. And they're also great to just give away. They're cheap. So let's move on. There's the Babylonian lion. And I believe that was taken at the Ishtar Gate. And we're interested in the Babylonians because they're going to keep popping up in history, not just in the prophets, but they're also going to pop up in the book of Revelation when we're told, come out from among her, my people. And last week we talked about what does it mean to come out from among her when we're in her. And we realize it's basically just obeying the word. That's how we come out from among her. But in some seasons, particularly right now, to that obedience to the word, it's not outrageous to add fasting and prayer, because sometimes we do get into dire straits. You know, as righteous as Daniel was, he did end up in a lion's den. As righteous as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were, they did end up in a fiery furnace. And who knows how that would have gone if, to their obedience habits, they hadn't also incorporated habits of fasting and prayer, particularly at times of distress. And so if we want to fight Babylon, you know, if we want lion pillows instead of to be eaten by lions, then, you know, we do want to pay attention to the fast dates. So here's the review. This is from Talmud Ta'anit. And if you're wondering what that is, the Talmud is Jewish law and commentary on it. But Ta'anit particularly explains a lot of details about the fasts. If you're interested in fasting and you feel like you've, you know, grown to the point that you can read the Jewish sources without just standing on your head, trying to figure out what they're talking about, Ta'anit will give you much more specific information about the fasts. And here's what it says. It says on the 9th of Av, it was decreed upon our ancestors that they would not be allowed to enter the land of Israel. That's where we're going to focus tonight and tomorrow. We're going to go back to these 10 spies because there's something there for us to learn from. The first and the second temples were destroyed. Beitar was captured. The city of Jerusalem was plowed over. From when the month of Av starts, we reduce joy. Okay, so that's why I put that calendar up here. So you could see on Rosh Chodesh, where I put the new moon on the 1st of Av, that's what it's talking about. This Wednesday, or the 1st of Av, even though you've kind of already been in a state of mourning and reflection up to this point, now it says you reduce joy even more from the 1st of Av until Tisha B'Av. So, and again, I think I talked about this last week. There's lots of customs that are practiced in the 3 weeks, and you're not obligated to do all that. But it's like so many other things. If you learn about it, there may come a time in your life where you can appreciate it, just like looking at Daniel and saying, well, you know what? He practiced a 21-day fast. Makes you wonder if it was during the season, because it says in those days. And like I said, that can mean a time period. It doesn't have to mean a specific day. Because it is talking about the first, in the first month. And the problem when you get into the Babylonian period is you don't know if they're talking about the first month Nisan, the first month Tishrei, the first month of a king, the first month of a Judean king, the first month of a Babylonian king. So there's some question marks in there, but he did practice a 21-day fast on that particular occasion. We saw that when they were first brought into the king's court, they declined to eat the meat and the wine. And so we've got a couple of things to remember here. First of all, on the 17th of Tammuz, that's when the daily sacrifice ceased, also when the wine libation would have ceased. So during this time, we commemorate that fact, that the daily sacrifice ceased, the wine libation ceased, and so as a custom, from the 1st until the 9th of Av, Jews don't eat meat or drink wine, except that which surrounds doing a commandment, such as Shabbat or circumcision. But we also have the precedent of Daniel and his companions abstaining from meat and wine in order to prepare them for what they were about to undergo in Babylon, in terms of having to be in Babylon, but yet coming out from among her. So, some GPS here. Like I said, Devarim is always going to fall during the 9 days of Tisha B'Av. And if we look through Devarim, there's some pretty harsh rebukes in there. And so the tone of it, the rebukes in Devarim, they're very consistent with the time period that we're in, which commemorates these numerous historical calamities. And then Ba'et Hanan, the portion Ba'et Hanan, will always follow Tisha B'Av. And so as we get into Ba'et Hanan and Ekev, which I believe follows that, at that point, I'll want to do a little bit more work with the tzila, with the supernatural bug. We're going to talk about it a little bit today. But there's a lot more to know about it so that you can be thoroughly familiar with it. When you're reading the book of Revelation, you'll have the Torah context for that crazy bug and understand, not so much that you would say, man, I can't wait till that bug gets out there, because we can obviously see what happens when the bug is loose. But to take heart when we see the work of the bug and understand that the bug's job is to clear the way for us. If we can see that as good. In fact, at this season, that's one of the expressions that is used. It's, let me see if I can remember, what is it? Gamzu Letova. This also is for good. Even though it might look like calamities all around us, we say this too is for good. Because like with the 10 plagues of Egypt, although they were plagues, they were for good. Because those were the things that cleared the way for the Israelites to leave Egypt. And so when we see the tzila, when we see the hornet that's causing confusion, causing blindness, causing torment, cutting off root and fruit, then we can look at that and say, you know what, it's a tough time right now, but this too is for good because it's going to clear the way. And so I need to understand what my role is relative to that bug. Because how we relate to that promise seems to be what determines how fast we go into the land at that elevated state, not in the natural realm, but in that elevated state that we've been called to. So even when you're reading in Va'etchanan next week, you're still going to see really strong connections to these calamities of this season. And the great thing is that you'll also find the prescription. If there's any calamity in your life, if there's disease and sickness in your life that is spiritual in origin, then the prescription in a nutshell is going to be the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. The prescription for all of these calamities is a return to a belief on one God, Yod-He Vav-He, of the Israelites, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, none other. And so just shooting ahead here, thinking ahead 1 week into Va'etchanan, look at these different passages out of Va'etchanan so that you know how to set your GPS this week. And it has to do with thinking on, understanding, meditating on, acknowledging, behaving as if there is only one God. You say, well, I get that. Well, if he thought we got it, he wouldn't repeat himself so much. So look at these passages that are from next week's Torah portion. Because again, we say we know that there's Tisha B'Av that's going to be connected with Va'etchanan every single year. And so he says in Deuteronomy 4:35, to you it was shown that you might know that the Lord, he is God. There is no other beside him. Then you drop down to verse 39. Know therefore today and take it to your heart that the Lord, he is God in heaven above and on the earth below. There is no other. Okay, remember, Moses isn't getting senile. He's repeating himself for a reason so that we'll pay attention. What is it that I need to know right now at this season? He's saying, you need to focus on the unity of Adonai. Deuteronomy 5:6, which is going to be a repeat of the 10 Commandments. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. Right? And then finally, Deuteronomy 7:9. He says, know therefore that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps his covenant and his loving kindness to 1,000th generation with those who love him and keep his commandments, but repays those who hate him to their faces, to destroy them. And I put the Hebrew in there so that you could see that and understand what had happened to Egypt. The ha'avido. Okay, you hear avad, the same avad from Abaddon, the abyss, Sheol, hell, whatever you want to call it. It's a place of destruction and a place of being lost. That's exactly what Pharaoh's servants said to him. They said, don't you know that Egypt is Avdah? It's destroyed. We're destroyed already. It's a picture of Abaddon, except Abaddon is a permanent state. You add that nun to the end of the word, and it puts it into a permanent construct. And so he brings that up in next week's Torah portion. He says, I'm going to show kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. But if you hate me, basically to Abaddon you go. You're going to be destroyed. And so, while at the same time that we're in a state of mourning for these past calamities of unrepentance, why would we do that? So that we would examine ourselves to see if we also are in a state of unrepentance, which there's some irony there. Yeah, I just can't imagine anybody putting himself or herself through this period of observing and, not already wanting to repent. It seems like if you didn't care about repentance, you would completely avoid acknowledging this season. Because this period of repentance, it's centered around this great calamity, the destruction of the temple. But I think not going into the land when they were supposed to, just personal opinion, I think it was way worse than the destruction of the temple. Once you understand what the offer was that was on the table right there, what could have happened, and how much greater and more elevated the temple would have been had they gone into the land at that time. I think we're going to talk about the greater calamity, which is the evil report that kept them out of the land for 39 years. But, like Daniel said, the wicked, they're not going to understand. But the righteous, they're going to have understanding. And it's odd sometimes how you want people to repent, but they do anything and everything to avoid hearing a message that would bring them to a state of repentance. And those who live a life of repentance are the very ones who seem to immerse themselves in this period. And it's odd, but it tells you somebody's character. And it helps you understand in Revelation when it says, those, wherever you're destined to go, if you're destined to go to the sword you go. And if you're going to be unclean, he says, you're going to go on being unclean. But if you're destined for righteousness, then you're going to go on being righteous. It's just like there's this point in time where things are sealed up. And whatever the choices you've made, a life of repentance and obedience, that's the direction you're going to go. If you have chosen a life of disobedience and destruction, then that's the road you're going to walk on. And it's not really outside of yourself. You chose that route. But I think at this particular season, we're reminded of that it's in the consciousness of the righteous. Let me examine myself at this time. And so, as we look at Hanan next week, we're going to realize, well, there's a caution against idolatry. And we have the the cities of refuge that are established on the other side of the Jordan to the east, which is where the exiles were always sent. They always went east. There's going to be some strong emphasis on the sin at Peor, which will link us again to the idolatry and the adultery, or the sexual licentiousness that are associated with the destruction of the first temple. But other than that, it's those verses I showed you. It's just this repetitive reminder that we need to believe on the uniqueness of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, that we need to believe that he is above all others. There is none beside him. He is the only one. That we are not to consort and attribute power to any other being. And it sounds pretty easy, but in practicality, when we look at all the things that we say are more powerful than he is, then you know what? From the most wicked to the most righteous, we should be dissecting our hearts right now. Idolatry is much more prevalent than we think, because it's attributing power to something or someone above Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And because we haven't seen him, we have to believe by faith. It's very easy to be drawn away and think that the economy is more powerful than he is, that a strong military is more powerful than he is, that a politician is more powerful than he is, or a political group is more powerful than he is, that, the power of sin is more powerful than he is, but he's more powerful than all those things. And so once we go through our lists of all the things that we respect, that we talk about, if you just do a word tally, you'll know if there's any shred of idolatry in your life. If you had a transcript of everything you said throughout the day, and you ran a few statistics on that transcript, what would come up? Who would you talk about the most? Or what would you talk about the most? And that should sober us all up. Talk about, getting away from the wine during the 9 days. If we had a transcript of our words, even if it was for 9 days, if it was for 1 day, it would tell us where our danger zones are with idolatry and the situations where we are investing our time and our belief. So in this time, again, be alert for idolatry, murder, and in our case, usually that's gossip. If you're entertaining an actual murder, we're in big trouble. But most often it's with our tongues that we tend to shed innocent blood. Sexual sin, and then the separation, this irrational, baseless hatred among brothers that particularly applied to the Second Temple. And so we look at those areas during this time, understanding that because there are appointed times and there are appointed seasons for specific things, that this seems to be historically a specific time for those sins to be recompensed very harshly. So if we have allowed a hobby to become an idol, if we have displaced Adonai as the most powerful one of the universe, and we believe that it's a politician, no matter what it is, he might judge that. He might turn that upside down for you so that you can be made aware of who is the supreme power. If you tend to gossip, you may really want to clamp down on that during this period, not with the idea that you would let up afterward. Hopefully it would be the lesson like, you know what, I need to be more careful, period. but murder might be recompensed more harshly in terms of our words. Sexual sin might be recompensed more harshly during this season. Doing things that would separate brothers in faith right now, that may be recompensed more harshly during this season. That's why I say pick your battles right now. Be careful. Look around. So let's go on and get into the Torah portion. And for now, I'm going to title it Air Jordan. Because Moses is to a place now that he's going to have to retrace the wilderness journey to make sure that they've learned the lessons before they cross over the Jordan. And that's what he does. In our Torah portion, Deuteronomy 1, starting about verse 18 and going through 46, he retells this entire incident with the spies. He retells the calamity that befell Israel on the 9th of Av. And I think there's some word connections that are there. That picture, by the way, was taken at the Banyas Falls, which is the headwaters of Galilee. And then from the Galilee, we know it flows down into the Jordan. So here's what he says in Deuteronomy 1:19. He says, then we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrible wilderness. That's the Midbar, which you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, just as the Lord our God had commanded us. And we came to Kadesh Barnea. I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is about to give us. Now, notice right there, he repeats himself. You saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites. You have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is about to give us. So when he says it twice, we say, okay, wait a minute. What does he want me to see when he's talking about the hill country of the Amorites? And then he says, see. Okay, now we get it. I'm supposed to read this and see something about the hill country of the Amorites. See. The Lord your God has placed, which is not a great English translation right there, because the Hebrew word is natan. Natan. He gave. Your God has gave the land before you. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has spoken to you. Do not fear or be dismayed. All right, he's been very specific. You're supposed to go up and see the land. He didn't tell them to strap on a sword. He didn't tell them to sharpen their spears. He didn't tell them to go pluck more feathers to make more arrows. He just says, see and possess it. Another translation for that would be inherit, just as he spoke to you. In other words, he's saying this is not new information to you Israelites, because he's already spoken it to you. He's already placed this land before you and you know about it. This is not a brand new piece of information he's introducing. He said he spoke this to you before. And that's what we saw last week. Even though he reminds them about the tzila, the supernatural hornet that's going to go before them, it wasn't the first time they'd heard about it. They heard about it back at Sinai. They heard about it before they ever came to the border of the land. It wasn't new information. And so Moses reminds them, he has spoken this to you. This isn't something I'm just passing along. He already told you that he has given it to you. But what we notice here, and that's why he mentions the Amorites, the hill country of the Amorites twice. It's something of a tripwire. It sets off an alarm. It says, okay, we're right at the threshold. It's time to cross into the land. Some things are about to be activated here once we hit this tripwire. And so we're going to cross into the land from the hill country. It says, you're going to understand this threshold. And the Amorites, by the way, are the Amorite, the speakers, the sayers, words. It always goes back to words, right? And so once they hit that tripwire that says, okay, now it's time, Moses doesn't tell them to go to battle. Instead, he just says, go up, Allah. And we know that the Olah offering, it's a going up offering. It symbolizes resurrection. Allah, it means resurrection. It's the hint to go up. In other words, when you go into this land, you can only go up because of the nature of it. But if you go into it with the wrong attitude, you can definitely go downhill. But it's a spiritual land. He's already told them how different this land is from any other. And if you want to dwell in this land, then there has to be a sense of going up. You have to believe in the resurrection. Remember, that's why Caleb goes to Hebron. He believes in the resurrection. He wants to connect with the patriarchs and the matriarchs who are buried there with this belief that it was the entrance back to the garden, that at the resurrection, they would be resurrected and they would go straight into the garden. They would just walk right into the entrance. And so Caleb goes there and he takes heart because he's reconnected with that resurrection doctrine that was passed down to the children of Abraham. And so Moses gives them this hint. He says, Allah, just go up and take possession. But the imperative that he uses is the verb si, re'eh. And so if we count backward 40 days from the 9th of Av, then you realize he's delivering this probably on the last day of Sivan, the 3rd month. So it's about to flip over to a new month. It's about to flip over to Tammuz. As these explorers set out, most of their work is going to be done in the month of Tammuz, the 4th month. And the tribe that is associated with that particular month is Reuven. Why was he named Reuven? Si, a son. Reu, that's what Moses says. Reu, si. He's placed it before you, you explorers. Go up and inherit. And so in that particular month, their job is to see. But remember, you've got 2 sets of eyes. You've got your natural eyes and you've got your spiritual eyes. If you're going up, which set of eyes are you supposed to be using? The lower eyes, the natural eyes, or are you supposed to be looking up with your spiritual eyes to see those things we talked about that Moses saw on the mountain? Because on the mountain, Moses sees everything. He sees the pattern for the tabernacle. We can see in the time of Yeshua that on the mountain, the disciples saw Yeshua speaking with Moses and with Elijah. So it's highly probable that Moshe even met Yeshua when he ascended the mountain. And so now he's sending the explorers up and he's saying, see. Why? It's associated with the tribe of Reuven. See a sun. I want you to go see if you can see the sun. if you can see the Son, if you can see Yeshua, then maybe you can see what I saw on the mountain. And so sending them off to do most of this work in the 4th month was to send them with a specific job to raise their eyes and not just see the natural land of Israel. It's not that spectacular. In fact, it could be disheartening. And that's exactly what they reported was the natural level, the physical level. All they can talk about is the giants and how fortified the cities are. And they've brought back a complete military analysis. They've been on a reconnaissance mission, a military reconnaissance mission. That's not what Moses sent them to do. Moses says, it's already yours. I want you to go see it. I want you to see it with spiritual eyes. I want you to go see a sun when you ascend that mountain. And so sending them out in the month of Tammuz to do this work, it had a favorable time associated with it tribally to be able to see. And so in Deuteronomy 143, Moses is reminding them of this. He says, so I spoke to you. Remember, he said, see. And now he says, but you would not listen. Instead, you rebelled. You rebelled against the command of the Lord and acted presumptuously and went up into the hill country. There's our hill country again. It's popping back. There's our tripwire. It says the Amorites who lived in that hill country came out against you and chased you like bees, right? In Hebrew, that's hadvarim. They chased you like bees do and crushed you from Seir to Hormah. Then you returned, B'tashuvu, you can hear tshuva in there, you returned and wept before the Lord, but the Lord did not listen to your voice, nor give ear to you. That's why I say it's important in this season to pick your battles. Make sure you've been told to fight that battle. Don't just wake up one morning and think you're going to fight the battle. And trust me, opportunities, if they have not already presented themselves during this season, you watch, they will, between now and the 9th of Av. And like I said, don't let your guard down after the 9th of Av. Keep it up. But he says, because you acted, you didn't see what I wanted you to see, and then you didn't listen. And then after you didn't see or listen, you went on and acted presumptuously. When you don't see what Moses saw, when you don't hear what Moses says, and that's pretty much what Yeshua said, you know, they have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them. And he's like, oh no, if somebody comes back from the dead, they'll listen. He's like, no. If they won't listen to Moses, they're not even going to listen to one risen from the dead. Which really gives us a tie-in to this right here. If they won't listen to Moses, then even if they saw Eleazar risen from the dead, it wouldn't penetrate. And so seeing and listening, those two things were necessary to be able to go up at the proper time. When they didn't go up at the proper time, then once they thought about it, because remember, their mindset is it's just a military thing, right? It's just a matter of we got to be brave. We just got to do it. And it was never a matter of you got to be brave. All you had to do was believe in the one who promised this land to you and already gave it to you. All you had to do was believe that he would send a hornet before you. And because you didn't believe in the hornet, then the Amorites chased you like bees. And they crushed you. And they made you cry. But because you didn't listen to Adonai, and you didn't listen to Moses, he's not going to listen to you. He didn't listen to you. That's how it works. Because remember, there's two sets of eyes. When they went out and explored the land, they didn't see it with spiritual eyes. They saw it with natural eyes. He says, okay, this is how this works. You were promised a supernatural bug that would clear this place out for you, little by little, not as fast as you want, but this supernatural hornet would do it. But because you could only see with your natural eyes, then you're going to get chased like bees, real bees, natural bees. And then they wept. And there has been weeping for generations. There's a modern expression in Hebrew. How does it go? Yeshlanu bechiot ledorot. There's weeping for generations. And see, when we're faithless like that, when we don't see, we don't listen, we don't lift up our spiritual eyes, then that calamity is passed along to the next generation. And here's what's interesting. Remember, they were sent out to see. That's associated with the tribe of Reuven, the 4th month. And then Moshe says, I spoke to you, but you wouldn't listen. That's associated with the tribe of Shimon. And Shimon is associated with the month of Av. So the 2 months that they're working in this exploration, Tammuz and Av, the 4th and the 5th month, they're associated with the tribes of Reuven and Shimon. See, a son, and hear. And so it's the attribute of hearing. I spoke, but you would not listen. So the Lord did not listen to your voice, nor give ear to you. That's why I say, at this season, we don't want to play with grace. Grace brought us out of Egypt. But at some point, we're going to have to see, and we're going to have to listen. And so you can see now why in this portion coming up, we're going to get into the Shema. Hear, O Israel. We're going to have to be reminded. You didn't see, and you didn't listen. And then you acted presumptuously in the hill country of the Amorites, and they chased you like bees. You don't want to believe in the Tzila. You don't want to believe in my supernatural provision. You don't want to believe what I've promised you in this land. If you want to reduce it down to a military battle, if you want to reduce it down to the men you can muster up for war, then go right ahead. And you can meet the bees. You can obey my Devar, my word, my Devarim, my words, the name of the Torah portion. You can believe that, you can hear that, you can listen to that, you can see that, or you can be chased by Hadvarim, the bees. And you can hear the contronym in there. A contronym is a word that acts as its own opposite. And it's your position relative to that word that determines what's going to happen, blessing or curse. You obey the Devar, you get the blessing. You inherit the land. It's given to you. You disobey the Devar, the bees chase you. So that would probably be a good place to stop.